The gavel hadn't even dropped yet, and something in Driven Archival had already stopped. Not his breathing, not his heartbeat, something deeper. The underground hall sat 60 feet beneath the Grand Celeste Hotel in Manhattan. Crystal chandeliers, red velvet curtains, private auction guests seated in curved rows like they were watching a show. Champagne glasses, designer suits, laughter, like this was normal, like this was fine. Lot 278 stood on the velvet stage in a white linen shirt 2 sizes too big, hands chained at the wrists, collar locked around his throat. A teenage Omega boy, dark hair, thin, eyes aimed at the floor, number card pinned to his chest. The auctioneer rattled off his stats like reading from a grocery list. Rare Omega genetic markers, excellent health screening results, no documented family claims. Opening bid set at 400,000. Laughter rippled through the crowd. One buyer in the third row leaned over to whisper something to the man beside him. Both of them smiled. Driven didn't smile. He stood at the upper balcony level with his brothers Caliph and Zorvain flanking him on either side. All 3 of them still. All 3 of them watching. They had come tonight for something else entirely. A different transaction. A different reason. That reason no longer existed to him. It had evaporated the moment Lot 278 was brought onto the stage and the air in the room changed. But then the boy was brought onto the stage, and Driven's entire body locked up, because something moved through the air in this room. Something that didn't belong here. It moved through the champagne smoke and the heavy cologne and the sweat of 100 powerful, corrupt people, and it cut straight to him like a signal meant only for his frequency. His own bloodline. Not similar. Not close. His. Caliph noticed first. He turned his head slowly and looked at Driven's face. That was enough. He pulled out his phone without a word and started running data. Zorvain stepped 1 inch closer to Driven's left side. Quiet. Ready. Neither of them asked questions out loud because when Driven went still like this, questions were not what the moment needed. Driven's eyes stayed on the boy. The auctioneer grabbed the boy's chin to angle his face toward the crowd, showing the merchandise, proving the condition. That's when Driven saw the bruises along his jaw. Old ones, new ones layered on top, and just below the boy's right ear, barely visible against his skin, a small raised scar, precise, surgical, an implant mark. Driven's jaw tightened. "Tell me something," he said quietly, not loudly, not to the room, just quietly. "Why does that boy smell like my blood?" Caliph glanced up from his phone. Zorvain's expression didn't change, but his hand moved inside his coat. The auctioneer continued his pitch below them, bid now climbing to 600,000. Another buyer raising a paddle. The crowd comfortable, the system working exactly as designed. And Driven stood at the balcony railing, looking down at a boy he had buried in his mind 16 years ago. The memory came without warning. A hospital hallway, white walls, a nurse blocking a doorway, his hands shaking, a fire alarm echoing, people rushing, a sealed room, a small body bag he was never allowed to open, officials telling him it was better this way, that seeing would only cause more pain, that his newborn Omega son had not survived the smoke. A doctor with steady hands and a practiced face handing him paperwork across a desk while the hallway behind him smelled like char. He had signed it. He had believed them. For 16 years, he had believed them. Hi viewers. Have you ever felt a connection to someone the moment you saw them, like something deep inside recognized them before your mind could catch up? Drop your answer in the comments. Because sometimes grief isn't closure. Sometimes it's a question nobody allowed you to ask. On the stage below, the bidding reached 800,000. The auctioneer's voice rose with it. The boy still hadn't lifted his head. His shoulders were drawn in. Shoulders that had learned to make a body smaller so it would draw less attention. Driven had seen that posture before. in people who had been taught over and over again that existing too loudly was dangerous. Then something shifted. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was 16 years of a bloodline connection that no amount of distance or deception could fully erase. Whatever it was, the boy's chin lifted. Slowly. And his eyes found the balcony. Storm gray eyes. The exact shade as Driven's own. The room kept moving around them. The bidding kept climbing. The chandeliers kept throwing golden light across velvet and champagne and corruption. But between the balcony and the stage, everything went completely silent. The boy stared at him. Driven stared back. And something cracked open inside Driven's chest that he had kept sealed shut for 16 years. He pushed off the railing. His voice came out low. Controlled. The kind of controlled that comes right before something becomes very, very dangerous. Remove the collar. Nobody moved. The auctioneer blinked up at the balcony level. The bidders looked around at each other. A few of them shifted in their seats. Because the voice that had just spoken was not the voice of someone making a request. It was the voice of someone informing the room of what was about to happen. The auctioneer recovered quickly. He adjusted his lapel and smiled the kind of smile that men in his business had practiced for years. Ownership must be established first, he said pleasantly. Standard protocol. No exceptions. 2 security guards stepped forward from the wings of the stage. Large men, earpieces in, hands already moving. Zorvain casually reached inside his coat. He didn't pull anything out. He just reached inside and let his hand rest there. Both guards stopped walking. They looked at each other. Then they looked at Zorvain. And they made the kind of calculation that men in their position sometimes got exactly right. They stayed where they were. Caliph hadn't looked up from his phone since Driven spoke. His fingers moved fast across the screen. His expression was the same flat calm it always was, the kind of calm that made people who didn't know him assume he wasn't paying attention. People who knew him understood it meant the opposite. He was always paying attention. More attention than anyone else in the room. It was why, of the 3 brothers, Caliph was the one you never wanted looking into your affairs. The search results came back in under 40 seconds. Lot 278. No registry. No trafficking entry point documentation. No facility of origin listed. No DNA match on file. Caliph stared at the screen for a moment. Then he looked up at Driven. There's no record, he said quietly. None. Which means someone didn't just hide him. He paused. They erased him. This matters. Because erasing someone from a system takes effort, takes access. It takes people in specific positions doing specific favors. This wasn't a clerical error. This was a decision someone made deliberately. And decisions like that don't happen without a reason. The auctioneer was still trying to maintain control of his room. His voice climbed a register. Gentlemen, if you'd like to submit a bid. We're not bidding, Driven said. He walked toward the stairs that descended from the balcony level to the main floor. The crowd started murmuring. Some guests shifted toward the exits. Not running. Not yet. But calculating. The way people calculate when they realize the atmosphere of a room has shifted and they're not sure which direction danger is coming from. Down on the stage, the boy hadn't moved. His eyes tracked Driven's descent. Something was working behind his expression. Not hope. He didn't have the face of someone who still hoped. It was more careful than that. More guarded. Like a person who had learned to identify threats early and was still determining whether this one was different from the others. Caliph was still moving through data when a second search result surfaced. He stopped. He went back 16 years. Public records. Fire incident documentation. A Nevada hospital. Smoke damage confined to 2 floors. 3 fatalities reported. Among the fatalities, 1 infant listed as unidentified remains recovered from a restricted care ward. The DNA confirmation field on the infant's record. Blank. Not incomplete. Not pending. Blank. Like someone had removed it. Caliph looked at his brother's back as Driven reached the main floor and walked toward the stage. He pulled up a secondary database. Cross-referenced the hospital with its funding sources. The result loaded. He went very still. On stage, the auctioneer took one step back as Driven approached. Not because he was told to, because something in the way Driven moved made stepping back feel like the reasonable choice. Driven stopped in front of the boy. Up close, the boy was even younger looking than he'd appeared from the balcony. 16. Maybe barely. His skin showed the kind of wear that came from years of controlled exposure to stress. The implant scar behind his ear was cleaner up close. Medical grade. Professional work. Driven reached out and pressed the manual release on the collar's side lock. Clicked. The collar fell. The boy's knees buckled slightly as the pressure released. He caught himself. Barely. His hands gripped the chain at his wrists and he steadied his own weight without asking for help. Like he had spent years learning that asking for help in a moment of weakness was the kind of thing that got used against you. His scent expanded the moment the collar dropped, the way a compressed signal expands when the frequency suppressor comes off. And the scent hit the room. Pure archival bloodline marker. Unmistakable. Several guests in the front rows reacted visibly. Some leaned forward. Some leaned back. Caliph whispered from 4 feet away. That's not coincidence. No, it wasn't. The boy steadied himself against the chain still at his wrists. He looked up at Driven's face. Closed now. Real. His brow furrowed slightly, like someone working through something they couldn't fully explain. His voice came out barely above a breath. Why do you smell familiar? Driven didn't answer right away. He crouched down to the boy's level instead. Then he removed his coat, dark, fitted, expensive, and wrapped it carefully around the boy's shoulders. The boy flinched, hard, full body, like the movement had triggered something reflexive, something trained into muscle and bone over years. He pulled back half an inch before he caught himself and went rigid, jaw tight, bracing, waiting for what came after a man reached toward him. That flinch told Driven everything he needed to know about what the last 16 years had been. He kept his hands steady, didn't pull back, didn't push forward, just held the coat loosely around the boy's shoulders and let him decide what to do with it. Slowly, carefully, the boy stopped bracing. Around them, the auction hall had shifted into something between confusion and disruption. Guests were talking in low voices. The auctioneer had retreated to the far side of the stage. 2 of his staff stood near the curtain, phones out, uncertain. Someone in the 3rd row said it loud enough to carry. Archival air? The murmur spread. Caliph was 3 feet away, phone against his ear now, voice too low to hear. His eyes moved between his screen and the room, measuring, calculating. Caliph always worked 3 moves ahead, which was why what he had just found was currently sitting in his chest like a stone. The secondary search had connected the Nevada hospital to a parent corporation. Helios Gene Systems, biotech firm, publicly positioned as a genetic research company. Clinical partnerships, government contracts, peer-reviewed publications. The kind of operation that looked completely legitimate from the outside. From the inside it was different. Because buried in acquisition records and restructured subsidiary filings were references to a specific research division. Rare omega genetic sequencing. Extraction protocols for high-marker bloodlines. Project development tracking. Caliph pulled up a cached boardroom document from 9 years earlier. Internal only. Never published. It had surfaced once in a leaked data breach and been quickly scrubbed. But cached versions had a way of surviving. The document outlined the commercial value of rare omega bloodline markers in the context of genetic material sales, experimental therapy development, and premium auction placement. Driven carried one of the rarest alpha-omega hybrid bloodline signatures ever documented. which meant a child of his bloodline would carry markers worth more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Caliph understood now. This was not random. This boy had been taken because he was worth something specific. The flashback came in fragments, the way recovered information sometimes does. Not Driven's memory. The kind of memory held in documents and records and transactions that happened in rooms nobody was supposed to know about. A boardroom. 14 years ago. Men in suits around a table. Someone presenting projected revenue figures. Rare bloodline subjects. Facility placement cycles. Auction pipelines. Market pricing for various omega classifications. Charts showing supply chains. Acquisition timelines. No one in that room used the word children. They used the word assets. Because language is the first thing institutions change when they want to make something inexcusable feel manageable. This was an industry, not an accident. An industry. Power attracts enemies. That's always been true. But bloodlines attract a different kind of threat entirely. The kind that plans years in advance. The kind that moves quietly through hospital fires and sealed paperwork and blank DNA confirmation fields. The kind that waits patiently because it knows the product appreciates over time. 16 years of patience. 16 years of profit. All of it built on the assumption that the boy's father would never look. That assumption had just failed them. The boy was watching Driven's face. Still cautious. Still calculating. But something in the way Driven had wrapped the coat around him instead of grabbing him was apparently working its way through his internal threat assessment. You knew what that collar suppressed, the boy said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes, Driven said. Then you know what I am. Yes. The boy's eyes stayed on him. Reading. Measuring. Why does it matter to you? He asked. Before Driven could answer, Caliph stepped forward and spoke in a voice pitched low, meant only for his brother's ears. The Nevada hospital fire may not have been an accident. Driven's head turned slowly. Caliph held his gaze and said nothing more, because the next sentence didn't need to be spoken. They had grown up together. They had run an empire together. They had learned to communicate the most important information in the fewest possible words. The fire wasn't an accident. Which meant the body bag was staged. Which meant someone had walked out of that hospital with a living infant and handed him to a corporation that had been waiting for exactly that transaction. Someone Driven had trusted. Someone who had access. Someone. The gunshot cracked through the air like a whip. Sharp. Loud. Followed immediately by the sound of the chandeliers vibrating from the pressure wave. Then screaming. Everyone moved at once. Chairs overturned. Guests scrambled for exits. Security personnel shouted into radios. The velvet curtains at the side of the stage tore sideways as a door burst open behind them. Armed men poured through. Not hotel security. Not auction staff. Tactical gear. Weapons drawn. Moving with formation discipline. Someone in the rushing crowd yelled it before they'd even cleared the room. Kill the archival heir. The entire room recalibrated in 1 second. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a disruption. This was an extraction hit. And now every person in that underground hall understood what the boy on the stage actually represented. Not merchandise. Not a rare omega to be won at auction. Political leverage. The kind that changed the balance of power between crime dynasties. Driven moved without hesitation. He grabbed the boy by the arm, carefully, not roughly, and pulled him behind the solid oak base of the auctioneer's podium. The boy didn't fight it. He moved fast and low, like someone who had learned how to survive sudden chaos. That's important. That instinct. It told Driven the boy had survived situations before. Many of them. Zorvain was already in the crowd. He moved between the fleeing guests and the armed intruders with the kind of efficiency that looked almost lazy until you watched what happened to the men who got close to him. The first two went down before they'd completed their approach. The third managed one shot before Zorvain redirected his arm. The shot went wide, hit the chandelier above the stage. Glass rained down across the velvet. Caliph had taken a position near the east wall, phone pressed flat to his palm, quietly transmitting the location coordinates and real-time situation to the archival operations team. Backup was already moving. 3 minutes out. 3 minutes was a long time in a room like this. The boy crouched beside Driven behind the podium. His chained wrists were pressed against his chest. The oversized coat still wrapped around his shoulders. His breathing was controlled, measured. Not the breathing of someone panicking. The breathing of someone who had trained themselves to stay functional in the middle of fear. He was watching Driven. Not the chaos. Not the gunfire 2 rows back. Not the men shouting tactical positions across the hall. Driven. His expression was working through something. Carefully. Like a math problem with too many variables. Driven met his eyes for half a second. "Stay behind me," he said. The boy didn't argue. But he also didn't fully comply. He shifted his position so that he was beside Driven, not behind him. An instinctive repositioning. Not defiance. More like someone who had learned that there was no fully safe position, so placing yourself on the edge of visibility was better than trusting any single point of cover. Another burst of movement near the stage stairs. 2 more armed men. Zorvain intercepted one. The other moved toward the podium. Driven stepped out from cover and handled it. For seconds. Clean. Controlled. The boy watched. And then the strangest thing happened. His expression shifted. Not fear. Not relief. Something older than both of those things. Something that lived below conscious thought, below memory, below the 16 years of conditioning and movement and controlled survival. His eyes went soft. Not weak. Soft. The way eyes get when something inside them recognizes something outside them and can't fully explain why. He was staring at the way Driven moved. The shoulder width. The angle of his jaw. The way his hands moved when he was focused on a threat. Details a teenager wouldn't consciously catalog but something deeper would record. Would store. Would hold onto across years of darkness. A lullaby surfaced somewhere in the back of his memory. He didn't know where it came from. A deep male voice. Low notes. Patient rhythm. The scent of cedar underneath it. Trauma erases the names of things. The dates. The faces. The facts. But the body keeps a different kind of record. The body remembers what safety smelled like before it disappeared. It holds that information in a place that no facility and no collar and no systematic conditioning can fully reach. The boy blinked. Zorvain's voice carried across the chaos. Clear. Service exit. East corridor. Now. Driven turned toward the boy. Can you run? The boy was already standing. They moved. Driven in front, the boy just behind his right shoulder. Through the overturned chairs and shattered glass and the last of the retreating crowd. Caliph fell in on their left. Zorvain covered the rear. The 4 of them moved through the service corridor like a unit, even though one of them had never been part of one before. The corridor was narrow, concrete. Emergency lighting casting long shadows. The sound of the hall fading behind them. 40 feet in, the boy's footsteps slowed. Just slightly. Driven glanced back. The boy was looking at him. His lips moved. Quiet. So quiet that even in the narrow concrete hall it barely carried. But it carried enough. Dad! Driven stopped walking. Not because he was told to. Because his body made the decision before his mind caught up. 3 feet behind him, the boy had stopped too. His eyes were fixed on Driven's back. Waiting. The word was already out. He couldn't pull it back. And his expression showed he wasn't sure whether saying it had been a mistake. Caliph and Zorvain kept moving forward for more steps before they noticed. Then they went still. Nobody spoke. The emergency lighting hummed above them. A single drop of water fell somewhere in the dark of the corridor ahead. The distant sound of shouting echoed from the hall behind. Driven turned around slowly. He looked at the boy. The boy looked back. And Driven did not answer the question. Not yet, because hope was dangerous. He had learned that. He had spent 16 years learning that. You did not let hope run ahead of facts. Not in his world. Not with the kind of enemies that existed in his world. Not when a wrong answer in either direction could destroy something that hadn't fully survived yet. He held the boy's gaze for 3 seconds. Then he turned back toward the exit and said, quietly, "Keep moving." The boy followed. He didn't push it, which told Driven something. A teenager who had spent 16 years reading rooms, reading people, reading every shift in atmosphere that might signal danger, knew when not to press. He had asked the question. He had placed it out there. He would wait to see what came back. The armored convoy was waiting at the service-level loading dock. 3 vehicles, tinted windows, engines already running. The archival operations team had positioned perfectly without needing a second instruction. That was the organization. That was what 16 years of building something meant. They loaded into the second vehicle. Boy in the middle seat, Driven on his right, Kalith on his left, Zorvain up front. The convoy moved. Kalith opened his tablet. "Helios gene systems," he said. He kept his voice level, factual. The way he always delivered information that was likely to cause problems. Biotech firm with public government contracts. Clean surface record. But the Nevada hospital that filed the infant fatality report 16 years ago was operating under a subsidiary funding structure tied directly to Helios. He turned the screen slightly so Driven could see the corporate tree. "They didn't just fund the hospital," Kalith said. "They owned the emergency response contractor that handled the fire cleanup. They owned the records management firm that processed the incident documentation. And they had a standing private arrangement with the attending physician on duty that night." Driven was looking at the screen, but his attention kept breaking toward the boy. Because Kalith was building the factual architecture of a 16-year conspiracy in real time, and on the other side of it was a teenager in an oversized coat sitting in an armored car who had just done something extraordinary. He had used the word dad, not to manipulate, not as a tactic. It had come out of him the way involuntary things come out. The way a name surfaces when you see a face you've never consciously seen but something inside you has been holding for years. The boy was looking out the tinted window at Manhattan moving past. His chain cuffs had been removed by Zorvain during loading. His wrists were marked underneath. He rubbed one of them absently, not seeming to notice he was doing it. Then his eyes closed, fully, and within 90 seconds he was asleep, which was its own kind of communication. The body of a person who had spent 16 years in captivity falling asleep in a moving vehicle meant one thing. Something below the level of conscious decision-making had assessed the people in this car and made a determination. Safe. Driven watched him sleep. Something moved through his chest that didn't have a clean name. Grief and fury and something else underneath both. Something he hadn't let himself feel in a very long time because feeling it required believing the boy was real, and the boy being real meant 16 years had happened. They had happened. Sometimes monsters don't take children out of cruelty. They take them because the world has built systems that assign value to specific bloodlines, and where there is value there will always be people willing to do the worst possible things to access it. The convoy pulled onto the highway toward the Hudson. Kalith set down the tablet and looked at Driven. Driven said nothing. His eyes stayed on the sleeping boy. Kalith leaned forward and spoke to the medical contact already waiting at the penthouse. Routine request. Full physical assessment on arrival. Blood panel. Neurological screening. Standard protocol. The medical contact asked one follow-up question. Kalith's expression changed. He turned toward Driven. "The implant," he said carefully. It wasn't just suppressing his scent. Driven looked at him. It's transmitting a signal, Caliph said. Active. Right now. Driven's eyes moved to the sleeping boy. Someone is tracking him. The convoy kept moving through the Manhattan night. And somewhere across the city, something was already moving toward them. The boy woke up screaming. Not loudly. Not the kind of screaming that fills a room. The kind that gets trapped in the throat halfway out. Like his body had learned a long time ago that making noise in the dark brought consequences. So even in his sleep, even in the middle of whatever nightmare had just moved through him, he held most of it inside. He sat up straight on the white medical bed. Eyes wide, chest heaving. Hands pressed flat against the mattress like he needed to confirm the surface was real. Driven was already in the doorway. He had not been sleeping. The archival penthouse above the Hudson was 42 floors up. Floor-to-ceiling glass on the north wall. The city spread out below like scattered light. Doctors had finished the initial physical assessment 2 hours earlier. 3 fractured ribs in various stages of healing. Malnourishment. Evidence of long-term stress hormone exposure. And the implant. Small. Precise. Seated just below the skull at the base of the brainstem. The signal had been shut down remotely by Caliph's team before they reached the building. But the chip itself still needed to come out. Surgery was scheduled for 6 in the morning. It was 4. The boy looked at Driven in the doorway and visibly worked to slow his breathing. He didn't ask what time it was. He didn't ask where he was. He had already catalogued this room when they brought him in. Exits. Sight lines. The distance between the bed and the window. Old habit. Survival architecture. You don't have to stay in the doorway, the boy said. His voice was rough from sleep. And from whatever the nightmare had been. Driven walked in and sat in the chair beside the bed. Not close enough to crowd. Close enough to be real. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, Manhattan kept moving the way Manhattan always did. Indifferent. Continuous. Down there somewhere, Caliph's financial team was already executing the first wave of moves against Helios gene systems. Account freezes. Regulatory filings. Quiet pressure applied to the right institutional relationships. Not loud. Not yet. The boy looked at the city through the glass. I've been sold 4 times, he said. Flat. It was the result of a person who had said those words inside their own head so many times, processed them so many times in the dark with no one to say them to, that the feeling had been worn down to something manageable. To something survivable. Driven said nothing. He listened. Because that was what the moment needed. Not reaction. Not rage performed for the boy's benefit. Just a person willing to sit still and receive what was being offered. I don't remember much before age 5, the boy continued. Fragments. A voice. A smell. He glanced sideways at Driven. Cedar. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Driven's jaw worked once. I kept thinking it was just something I made up, the boy said. Because you need something. When everything around you is designed to make you feel like nothing exists outside the walls, you build something internal. Something they can't reach. The quietest anger is often the most dangerous kind. Not because it explodes. Because it doesn't. Calculates. It waits. It builds infrastructure while the people it's aimed at are still sleeping. That was the anger currently living inside Driven Archival. 16 years of it. And it had just been handed a name, a funding structure, and a corporate address. 3 things. That was all it needed. The rest was already in motion. The boy looked at him directly. If you're really my father... He stopped. Steadied. Why didn't you find me? That question. That specific question broke something open in Driven that had been sealed for a long time. He didn't look away from it. He didn't reach for an explanation that made himself sound better. He sat with it. I was told you were gone, he said. And I believed the people who told me. A breath. That's on me. The boy studied him for a long moment. Then he turned back toward the window. Not forgiving. Not refusing to forgive. Just processing. Storing. Filing it somewhere to return to later. From across the penthouse, Kalitha's voice cut through. Controlled. Urgent. The Helios board is moving. Driven stood. 3 executives just booked private flights out of the country. Wheels up in 90 minutes. He looked at Zorvain. Zorvain was already pulling on his jacket. The boy watched Driven move toward the door. Will you come back? He asked. Not desperately. Just directly. Driven stopped. Turned. Yes, he said. And he meant it in a way he had not meant a single thing in 16 years. The flights never left. The first one was flagged at customs clearance level when Kalitha's legal team dropped a sealed federal disclosure filing at 5 in the morning. The second was grounded when the aircraft operator's insurance provider received a certified fraud inquiry covering a specific set of shell company transactions. The third executive made it to the tarmac before his accounts were frozen in 4 jurisdictions simultaneously. All 3 men were back inside the country. None of them were comfortable. Kalith worked quietly at the kitchen island of the penthouse. 3 screens open, a cup of coffee going cold beside him. He had been awake for 31 hours. His expression hadn't changed in most of them. This was the part of the work he was built for. Not the auction hall. Not the corridor fight. The systematic dismantling of something powerful through its own pressure points. Because every institution that hides crimes has a structural weakness. The weakness is always the same. Money. Follow the money long enough and you stop finding transactions. You start finding decisions. And decisions have names attached to them. By 6:15 that morning, the first media outlet had the story. A single document packet. Sourced anonymously. Routed through 3 intermediaries. By 7, 2 more outlets picked it up. By 9, the story had a name, a corporate logo, and a photograph of the Helios Gene Systems headquarters building on the front page of every major digital news platform in the country. Human experimentation on Omega children. The headline was simple. The story behind it was not. 16 years of facility records, transfer logs, auction pipeline documentation, DNA extraction protocols, subject acquisition timelines. All of it sourced from the same corporate records database that Helios had believed was permanently secured. It had not been permanently secured. 3 Helios board members released statements within the first hour. All 3 distanced themselves from the division in question. All 3 used the phrase "without my knowledge." All 3 had signed off on the subsidiary funding that financed the division's operating budget. Their lawyers would spend the next year explaining that. The world was loud about it now. In the penthouse, the boy sat on the couch in front of the television and watched it happen. He was wearing a gray sweatshirt that was slightly too large for him. His wrists were bandaged. The surgery had gone cleanly 2 hours earlier. The chip was out. His scent was fully his now, unconditioned, uncapped, and the doctors had noted quietly to Driven that his bloodline markers were extraordinary, the kind they had only read about in academic papers. But the boy wasn't thinking about any of that. He was watching a news anchor read sentences into a camera. Sentences that described places he had lived. Things that had been done to children in those places. Things that had been done to him, and he was watching the world react to it. Shock, outrage, politicians releasing statements, a senator calling for immediate federal investigation, former Helios investors issuing public distance. The corporate structure beginning to turn on itself the way it always did when the weight of exposure became heavier than the weight of loyalty. Justice can be loud. That part was loud. What the television couldn't show was the other part. The boy sat very still through all of it, his hands in his lap, his face composed. But his eyes were doing something private. something that required stillness to process. Because seeing your own story told back to you by strangers, on screens, in front of millions of people, while you are sitting in a penthouse above the same city where you were sold 3 days ago, that does something to a person that doesn't have a clean name either. Part of it was disorienting. His experience, reduced to sentences and graphics and expert commentary from people who had never been inside one of those facilities. Part of it was something else, something harder to categorize. A kind of uncomfortable relief, that it was real, that it had been real all along, that the world now had to stop pretending it wasn't. The anchor on screen said the word children again. The boy looked at his own bandaged wrists, then back at the screen. Driven sat down beside him, not across the room, not in the doorway, beside him. No speech, no strategic framing, no agenda. Just a man sitting beside his son on a couch while the world outside finally started telling the truth. The news anchor was still talking. Panel now. Someone explaining how a structure like Helios could have operated without regulatory review for this long. The answer involved money and access and the same truth that had always been true, that systems designed to protect power tend to overlook crimes committed by the powerful. The boy watched them argue. He had no interest in their arguments. He had already lived the subject matter. It was the first time Driven had not been a king in 16 years. He was just a father. The boy didn't say anything for a long time. Then the penthouse security alarm triggered. 3 sharp tones. Not a test. Zorvain came through the hallway door with his weapon drawn before the 3rd tone finished. Northeast stairwell, he said. 3 heat signatures. Moving fast. They came through the service entrance on the 41st floor. 3 of them. Tactical gear. No insignia. Weapons suppressed. Moving in a stacked formation through the maintenance corridor with the kind of discipline that came from professional training, not street experience. These were not Helios security contractors scrambling in panic after a morning of bad headlines. These were hired professionals. Different organization entirely. Zorvain met the first one at the corridor junction. 12 seconds. The second came from the left stairwell. 8 seconds. The third had positioned at the end of the hall and fired twice before Zorvain closed the distance. Both shots missed. The third one did not get a third. In the main room, Caliph had moved the boy behind the kitchen island and was crouched low with a hand on his shoulder. Steady. Communicating through the pressure alone. Stay down. Stay still. This is being handled. The boy's breathing was controlled. Again, that same measured calm from the auction hall corridor. He had a way of shrinking into stillness during danger that looked like resignation from the outside but was actually the opposite. It was active, deliberate, a survival skill so deeply conditioned it had become reflex. Driven stood at the room's edge, listening. The hallway went quiet. Zorvain appeared at the door. He held up 3 fingers, then made a flat cutting motion. Handled. He walked into the room and crouched beside the body of the third attacker. Searched the jacket, the belt, the left interior pocket. He found the phone. It was locked, but the last active screen before the lock engaged was still visible. A list, a text thread. At the top, a sender name that meant nothing to Calith's current database but would mean something very soon. Volkov Syndicate, Eastern European crime family. Old money, older grudges. No direct connection to Helios on the surface. But surface connections were not the kind Zorvain was looking for. He was looking for operational overlap. Shared interests. Points of contact that existed beneath the documented record. Because in this industry, nothing happened through a single organization. Everything was networked. Everything was protected by the same principle, mutual exposure. You know what I did. I know what you did. Neither of us talks. That principle had protected a lot of people for a very long time. It was beginning to stop working. He handed the phone to Caliph. Caliph looked at the screen for 4 seconds. They want the air, he said. Not surprised. Matter of fact. Not for Helios. For leverage against us. Because that was how it worked in the world the Archival brothers operated in. When one dynasty was weakened by exposure, every other dynasty circled. The boy stood up from behind the island. Can I see that? He asked. Caliph looked at Driven. Driven gave a small nod. Caliph handed the phone over. The boy scrolled through the visible portion of the text thread. His expression stayed flat, but his eyes moved carefully, like someone who had spent years learning to extract information from whatever small windows they were given. He stopped on something. He looked up at Driven. They knew I was at the auction 3 days before you showed up. That matters. Pause on that, because if the Volkov Syndicate knew about the auction 3 days in advance, they had a source inside the Helios network. Which meant the network was larger than a single corporation. Which meant the auction hall, the transfer system, the entire pipeline had been operating under multi-organizational protection. One of the attackers had delivered something before Zorvain reached him. A phone, encrypted, but partially unlocked in the struggle. Zorvain had already extracted the readable portion and handed it to Caliph while the others were talking. Caliph looked at the screen. His face changed. Not dramatically, just slightly. A single shift around the eyes. The kind that meant the information on the screen was not what he had expected. He looked up. You should have let the boy stay dead, he read quietly. That was the message they were carrying. The room processed that. It confirmed something darker than a kidnapping for ransom operation. The hospital theft 16 years ago had not been Helios acting alone. Multiple powerful families had been involved in that original transaction. Multiple powerful families with an interest in ensuring the boy never surfaced. And now he had. Zorvain moved to the window, scanned the street below. 42 floors down, a black vehicle was pulling slowly away from the building's service entrance. He memorized the plate. Caliph was already pulling up the evidence recovered from the phone. Scrolling. Reading. His expression grew still in a way that was different from his usual still. This was the kind of still that came right before something became much larger than anyone had originally prepared for. He turned the screen toward Driven. It was a list. Names. Facility codes. Transfer dates. Omega children. Hundreds of them. Driven looked at the list. Then he looked at the boy. The boy was already looking back at him. There are more of them, the boy said. Not a question. Oh wait. The boy didn't sleep again that night. He sat at the window instead. Knees pulled up. City below him. The list on the screen across the room that he had memorized in the 4 minutes Caliph had left it visible. Hundreds of names. He knew some of those facility codes. He had lived inside 2 of them. He knew what those names meant. When morning came and Driven found him still at the window, the boy turned around and said something nobody in the room had been expecting. What are we going to do about the others? Not what are you going to do. What are we going to do? Driven looked at him. I expected revenge, the boy said. That's what powerful people go after. The people who hurt them. A pause. But those kids didn't hurt anybody. And nobody powerful is going after them. He let that sit. I spent a lot of years waiting for someone to come, he said. Nobody came. And I promised myself if I ever got out, I wasn't going to be one of the people who knew and kept walking. True strength doesn't arrive dramatically. It doesn't announce itself. It walks in quietly, still carrying its own wounds, and looks outward anyway. Driven stood in the room and felt 16 years of personal fury reorganize itself around something bigger than himself. Tell me what you know, he said. The boy talked for 2 hours. Facility layouts, transfer schedules, guard rotations he had observed and memorized during years of movement between locations, names of staff he had overheard, codes used in intake documents, patterns in how children were moved when a location was being cleared for inspection. He spoke without notes, without prompting beyond the occasional specific question from Caliph. He spoke the way someone speaks when they have been storing information for years with nowhere to put it, no one to give it to, no reason to hold on to it except the belief, the stubborn, irrational, necessary belief, that someday the information would matter. It mattered now. Caliph recorded everything, asked specific questions, built a map. By early afternoon, they had a tactical picture that would have taken a federal investigation 6 months to assemble. The boy had built it from memory. Because survival sometimes turns people into something extraordinary without their permission. It doesn't ask. It doesn't give you a choice. It just takes everything you've been forced to witness and stores it somewhere useful, because usefulness is the only currency that ever kept you safe. Zorvain began coordinating with 3 of the archival syndicate's most trusted covert operations teams. Locations identified from the facility codes in the list. 7 active sites across 5 states. 2 international. The first raid launched at 4 in the morning. No announcement. No press coverage. No political permission. Just quiet, coordinated, professional force applied to locations that had been operating in darkness for a very long time. By dawn, the first facility was empty of staff and full of investigators. 31 children recovered. Not numbers. People. With ages and faces and the same trapped stillness the boy had carried into the auction hall. Some of them didn't speak when they were found. They simply stood in the light of doorways that had finally opened and waited to see if this was real. It was real. By the second night, 3 more facilities. 87 total. The numbers climbed through the week while the boy sat in the penthouse and followed the operation on Caliph's secondary screen, which Caliph had quietly repositioned so the boy could see it without having to ask. Each number on that screen was a person. The boy understood that better than anyone in the room. On the 4th day, something shifted. He was sitting at the kitchen table eating. Actually eating. Not the controlled, rationed consuming that Driven had watched during the first 2 days, where the boy ate like someone who expected the food to be taken away mid-meal. This was different. Slower. More present. Driven sat across from him. They ate in silence for a while. Then the boy set down his fork. He looked at Driven. And he said it clearly. No hesitation this time. No fragility wrapped around it. Dad. Just that. Like a door opening that had been stuck for a very long time. Driven set down his own fork. He didn't perform anything. He didn't reach for words that would make the moment bigger than it already was. He just nodded. And something passed between them that 16 years of separation and grief and fury and a corporate crime network and 2 assassination attempts had not been able to prevent. The beginnings of something real. From across the penthouse, Caliph's alert tone sounded. A single notification. Caliph picked up his phone. Read the screen. Set it down. He looked across the room. We intercepted a message from a hidden Helios director, he said. Someone who was not in any of the documentation we recovered. He paused. The message reads, "You saved the children." Another pause. Longer this time. "But you just started a war." 3 months later. The boy's name was Zaylan. He had chosen it himself, 3 weeks after arriving at the penthouse. Driven had not pushed, had not suggested, had simply told him that whatever name he wanted was his, that nothing about who he was going to become needed to be assigned by someone else. Zaylan had thought about it for 2 days. Then he had written it on a piece of paper and slid it across the kitchen table. Zaylan Archival. Driven had kept the paper. 3 months in, the penthouse felt different. Not completely. Not in the way that pretended the previous 16 years had been edited out. The scars on Zaylan's wrists were still visible. He still woke up some nights with the trapped scream. He still mapped exits in every new room he entered. Those things did not go away quickly. They were not supposed to. Healing does not work on a timeline that grief respects. But other things were different now. He had started eating without watching the door. He had started leaving his bedroom without checking the hallway first. He had started sitting beside Driven in the mornings without the half-second pause that used to come before he allowed proximity. Small things. Significant things. The hardest part for Driven was not the war. It was not the ongoing legal proceedings against Helios, which were now spanning 4 federal jurisdictions and 2 international courts. It was not the Volkov syndicate who had gone quiet since the penthouse attack, which was the kind of quiet that meant they were planning something rather than giving up. It was not the media which had moved on to the next story with the efficiency that media always operated at. The hardest part was guilt, the kind that arrived at unexpected hours. Not dramatic, not loud, just present. Sitting in the corner of every room and every moment where things were finally going right. Because sometimes the hardest part of being the person who eventually shows up is living with the knowledge of how long you didn't. On a Thursday morning in early spring, Zaylan walked out onto the north balcony. The same city, the same skyline that had watched him sold 3 months earlier. The same Manhattan that had operated above while below it, in a basement lined with velvet and crystal, children were being priced like inventory. He stood at the railing and looked out. A minute passed. Driven came through the balcony door and stood beside him. They looked at the city together. "You said something," Zaylan said. "In the tunnel that night." Driven waited. "You said we were never meant to meet like this." A breath. "I've been thinking about that." Zaylan turned slightly toward him. "I think you were wrong." Driven looked at him. "This is exactly how we were supposed to meet," Zaylan said. "Because if it had gone any other way, I would have walked out with some buyer. And you would have gone home. And neither of us would have known." He turned back to the skyline. "At least this way it's real." Driven did not argue. Because the boy was right. "You were never alone," Driven said. "Not even when everything was designed to make you feel that way." Zaylan looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. And for the first time he looked like he believed it. Behind them the balcony door opened. Caliph stepped out. He had a folder in his hand. Thin. Classified markings on the cover. The kind of folder that arrived when something had been verified across multiple sources before being brought forward. He held it toward Driven without speaking. Driven took it, opened it. "Read the first page." His expression changed. Not the controlled shift from earlier months. Something deeper. Something that moved beneath the surface of 16 years of discipline and found the place where the unfinished grief still lived. He looked up. "Helios had another project," Caliph said quietly. A pause. "A second child." The folder stayed open in Driven's hands. Another stolen archival bloodline. Another name on a transfer document. Another facility code. Zaylan looked at his father's face and understood without being told. Driven closed the folder slowly. The skyline was still there. Manhattan still moving, indifferent and continuous the way it always did. His voice came out quiet, completely calm. The kind of calm that had a war behind it. Find them. If this story moved something in you, if it made you feel the weight of what love, loss, and a father's fury can look like when everything is finally brought to light, then this channel is where you belong. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that hits this deep. Every chapter we release is crafted to stay with you. Share this story with someone who needs to believe that truth eventually finds its way out. And drop a comment below. Tell us, what was the moment in this story that hit you hardest? Your words inspire the next person who finds this channel. We read every single one.